Okay, we'll go on air. I declare the council members' briefing session open at 6:15. Good evening, councillors, staff, ladies and gentlemen. This meeting today is being held on Whadjuk Noongar Budja, and I would like to acknowledge and pay my respects to elders past, present and future. I thank all past and present members of the community that have supported the city to better understand and value Noongar culture within the city of Wanneroo. Please note that the proceedings of tonight's meeting will be live broadcast online, with the exception of matters discussed behind closed doors. The broadcast will be available via the City of Wanneroo website following the conclusion of the meeting. Item 1, attendances, which are as per the record, and I think Councillor Civic is our only apology this evening. Deputations. The rules of deputation are: deputations are to be presented during the briefing session at item 3 in the order of business. Deputations must relate to a report on the current briefing session agenda. A deputation is not to exceed 3 speakers in number, and only those speakers may address the council members. Speakers of a deputation will collectively have a maximum of up to 10 minutes, dependent on the number of deputations received, to address the council members unless an extension of time is granted. A deputation is to be in the form of a statement, and no debate or discussion on the matter is to occur. Questions from council members relating to the subject matter should be reserved until the administration has presented on the relevant report during the meeting. However, a point of clarification by a council member on a specific statement may be permitted. There is an opportunity for public question time for members of the public at item 7 in the order of business. Please be advised that the following deputations have been confirmed. The first deputation is on item 4.1, consideration of amendment of number 1 to the Alkimos City Centre Activity Structure Plan number 89 following advertising. Speakers are Chris Nolan and Damien Guiducci. Are they here this evening? If you would like to come to the podium and give us your name and the suburb that you live in. Thank you. Push the button, so that's it. Now we can hear you.
Brilliant. Yep, that's it. We're all good? Thanks, Greg. Good evening, councillors. My name's Chris Nolan. I'm from Urbis. This is Damien Guiducci from Development WA. As mentioned, this evening we're speaking to item 4.1 on the agenda, being Amendment 1 to the Alkimos Central Precinct Structure Plan. Over the last couple of days, you've been provided hundreds, if not thousands of pages of information on the proposed amendment, so we'll try to keep this relatively light. In the first instance, I can confirm that we are very much supportive of the positive recommendation put forward to you by the officers. And we've been working with the officers and many government agencies for many years, even pre-COVID, on this item, so we're quite excited in terms of where this is at. We're also generally comfortable with the suggested modifications put forward by the officers, and we'll continue to work with the City and DPLH on finalising these few last items. So the first question you might ask yourself, why we've undertaken this redesign, rework of the structure plan for a structure plan that was only adopted in 2018. Well, I guess a lot has changed since 2018. As you'd all know, we have a commitment and obviously construction underway of the Yanchep rail extension. And the previous iteration of the structure plan, you might note, actually removed the station and had a blank space, a rather large blank space in and around the station precinct. So part of our job was to fill that in. We've also had commitment and obviously construction underway of Mitchell Freeway through to and inclusive of Romeo Road. Through that process, we discovered, through Damien's lead, a series of pinnacles which do have Indigenous heritage value. So ultimately that required us to realign Romeo Road, which wasn't a straightforward exercise. In 2020, there was a decision by this council to confirm the location of the Aquatic and Recreation Centre at Alkimos, which is a great outcome. And the WAPC during this period as well have changed the game and the rules around precinct structure plans. So we had to kind of rewrite everything to suit the Commission. The big thing, I guess, that has changed, however, or that happened, was a global pandemic, and that's forever changed the way we work, that we live, we recreate, we shop. So we had to think long and hard about a post-COVID world and what a new centre looks like. The notion of work from home, smaller retail floor space, Coles and Woolies don't need the same size as they used to. The rise of click and collect and delivery has really changed shopping and also the way we work and the way we lived. So a big job of ours was actually, well, what does a modern centre look like? In the context of all of this, the key changes to the now precinct plan, as it is called, is a smaller and consolidated and hopefully more active and vibrant city centre core, circa 40 hectares versus a much larger bit of blue that you would have seen on the previous structure plan. There's obviously the ARC facility, which we say is really well located and it's going to be fantastic next to the train station and a city square that we've identified as well. We've spent a lot of time working on the retention of that dual system. There's a green loop that you see around the core. The previous structure plan had that in, but was quite notional. We've spent a fair bit of time mapping that in a fair bit of detail to make sure it works and to make sure that we get that continuous loop. And that will form a 3.5, 4K kind of contiguous exercise trail, which I think in this corridor is just going to be fantastic. There's been a commitment to 20,000 trees within the public realm and the private realm for that matter. We've inserted some very bespoke built form guidelines for individual precincts. As a result of the blue area getting smaller, we've got a bigger mix of residential. So not just high density, we've got low, medium and high density residential within the plan now. And probably the other thing that you would have noted is that the school location has changed a little bit. Our friends at the Department of Education didn't want it in the city centre, so it's gone to the other side of NS2, which we say is a bit of a shame, but that's where we're at. So in summary, quite a bit has changed over the journey, but we say for all very good reasons. In conclusion, we're particularly excited to get to this stage of the precinct planning process for Alkimos. And Urbis, along with Development WA, are really excited about getting to the next stage and actually getting development in the ground now that the station is moving ahead. And ultimately a project that will deliver circa 10,000 jobs for the centre and be home to some 6,000 residents. That's all I really want to touch on today. I note that there's no questions, but if there are points of clarification, happy to answer.
Thank you, Mr Nolan. Would Mr Guiducci like to speak?
No, we were here for clarifications or any questions, so yeah,
okay.
Chris has covered everything that we're...
Would any councillors have asked any points of clarification? If not, thank you very much for coming to see us this evening.
Thank you.
The next deputation this evening is Tracy Klanowski, and it's about item 4.2 and item 4.3. 4.2 is consideration of amendment number 202 to District Planning Scheme, and item 4.3 is consideration of amendment 7 to Neerabup Industrial Area. Thank you.
So I'd like to thank council members for the opportunity to speak on this very important matter within the District Planning Scheme number 2, amendment number 202 and amendment number 7 to the Neerabup Industrial Area, which was advertised by the City for comment. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank the City for responding positively to a misunderstanding regarding the Queen's Rock Environmental Group submission. So I'm here from the Queen's Rock Environmental Group, and I'm also here from being a resident in Carramar. So from Queen's Rock, we're a community organisation promoting conservation and sustainability, working in Queen's Rock and surrounding areas. We've long shown interest in the NIA area, including the significant bushland that is valued by the community. I've also lived in Carramar for a number of years, and I really care about the environment and the many nature's benefits that are found in this area. So in the published reports regarding the District Planning Scheme number 2 and amendment number 7 being presented, we are concerned with the continued loss of significant native vegetation across the city of Wanneroo. While the supporting documentation for the above amendment notes that significant areas of bushland remaining in the NIA are subject to further investigations, the footprint of the amendment number 7 includes large areas of bushland that yet have been approved for clearing. So the published reports, what we've identified, are not transparent in how many hectares of bushland that is uncleared and approved for clearing bushland are affected. And I guess it's also difficult to see the links between the city's recently promoted strategies on climate change, adaptation and mitigation and urban forests, which were seen in the What's Happening magazine, and the city planning further clearing of bushland. So according to the Australian 2021 State of the Environment report, biodiversity loss continues to rise, with threatened ecological communities listing increasing by 20% over the previous 5 years. This includes 2 threatened ecological communities, the Banksia and the Chewett Woodlands on the Swan Coastal Plain. Both will be affected by the development within the NIA and the associated infrastructure. So in the context, the Quinns Rock Environmental Group offers the following comments and recommendations on the advertised district planning. So the conservation area, the classification is strongly supported. However, it's acknowledged that the reserve is created by an offset requirement for clearing other bushland in this area. If it had not been required by the legislative process, would this bushland be protected? We do not consider offsets compensation. The proposed Martha Reserve boundary should be extended to include the adjoining bushland north of this reserve, the clearing which has been previously declined. Now, the public purposes recommended the reservation designed to facilitate a drainage sump is moved out of the proposed Martha Reserve to the edge of the reserve to minimise potential impacts, especially the spread of weed through this area. Also, minimise the adverse or visual and environmental effects of the industrial zone, such as the noise, dust and odours. I've noticed as a resident in Carrimer the increased noise from Flynn Drive, from Wanneroo Road. It's really particularly bad from all the clearing that's occurred in that area. So what we would like to see is that perhaps, the city can promote replanting, maintaining the trees that are already there. So the proposed change to the zoning from industrial development to general industrial service will involve clearing native vegetation in the NIA. Previous clearing permit has been declined and should not be cleared. So what mechanisms will the City of Wanneroo do to implement to protect the significant biodiversity within these areas yet to be mapped? At the moment, there is no provision for even acknowledgement for connectivity to facilitate fauna movement between conservation areas. What about the bushfire risk management to protect the fragmented bush in the proposed reserves? It's critical that all asset protection measures are facilitated on the industrial areas to reduce clearing within the conservation areas to manage fuel loads. Other matters, the proposed railway would further fragment Neerabup National Park and is opposed. It would be good to see the city's advocacy for connectivity via transport infrastructure extended to promote connectivity of the bushland. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Ms Kowalski. Mr Dixon, would you like to respond to that deputation?
Thank you, and thank you for the deputation. It was very well presented. Just a couple of observations from me, Mayor. In total, there's 1,000 hectares that's identified for the Neerabup industrial area. Of that, approximately 300 hectares are likely to be retained, currently identified in the structure plan, which includes a reserve for conservation off Mather Drive, which the city will be providing. There's 2 areas of Bush Forever, one in the east adjacent to the Wanneroo Golf Club and one in the northwest. And there's a further 210 hectares of further investigation on environmental grounds as to whether development should or should not occur. In addition, about 2% of the site will be retained for public open space, and I would hope as part of that we'd be looking for retention of existing vegetation within the context of that public open space. And just picking up on the point around the importance of trees, the city acknowledges that through the urban forest strategy, and as part of the development of the area, within the public realm, within the road network, we will be looking for planting of trees in addition to the areas which are aimed to be protected.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Thank you. Do you have a point of clarification? Ms Klonowski, would you like to come back? Councillor Miles has a point of clarification that he would like to ask you.
Good to see you again. From the last time you visited and you requested, I see also you've asked for an update on the Flynn Drive alignment of the road, because I know that was out for tender. Have you had no response from administration on viewing that plan as yet?
No, nothing.
Okay. Have you asked the Director of Infrastructure?
I haven't actually, but I haven't received anything. I had been in contact with one of the staff here, and I haven't heard anything for the last 4 or 5 months.
Okay. Maybe Mayor, the Director, could update.
Mr Singh, would you like to respond to that, please?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. As part of the Flynn Drive road project, we are conducting a public drop-in session that will be held later this month, and we are going to be advertising that very soon. Some of the letters have already gone out. During that drop-in session, community will be welcome to come and view those plans and receive information on the project.
Would we be able to directly send a letter to Ms Klonowski so that she knows it and might not miss it on Facebook or on our advertising program? Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, we have another deputation this evening, which is Laurel Gregory. If Laurel would like to come to the podium and just give us her name and suburb. It's about the response to petition PT 030323 requesting a pedestrian accessway closure between Blackmore Avenue and Innes Place, Girraween. Thank you, Ms Gregory. Would you like to speak now?
Thank you. My name is Laurel Gregory. I'm from Girraween, and I'm here to speak on behalf of all the residents that have signed the petition, 27 in total. Some of them are here tonight. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. We're requesting the closure of the walkway for the reasons of safety. First of all, there's been fires lit in the alleyway, very close to houses and fences. We've had the fire brigade out on numerous occasions. Also, the rangers have undertaken patrols, but that is during daylight hours. Most of the crime along that walkway is happening after dark. At the end of my street, which is a cul-de-sac, which links from that part of the alleyway to Blackmore Avenue, we have cars coming up, people getting out at night time, walking up the alleyway for a couple of minutes and then getting back into their car and driving away. I'm not sure what that involves, but I'm assuming it's drug use. We have had a lot of rubbish dumped up the alleyway, including needles and used drug bags, along with tissues with blood, underwear, used sanitary items, human faeces. There's a lot of graffiti, and we've had trolley loads of rubbish, including clothing, household items that have been left there for days, sometimes weeks at a time. Even though it's being reported by the residents, the rangers are not coming out immediately. There's a lot of activity after dark, including motorbikes going back and forwards through the alleyway. Even though there's been bollards installed, I think this is the third lot of bollards that have been installed along that walkway. There's still motorbike access through there. It's still a big enough gap that they're coming through there. So the residents are concerned. A lot of them have children, pets that they walk through there, and somebody's going to be injured eventually or even killed. As far as the rangers are concerned, we've been informed that they're doing patrols and also having a look at what's going on in the alleyway. There's residents from both ends of the alleyway who have witnessed the rangers driving, stopping, not getting out of the car, just having a quick look and driving away. There's no regular maintenance or cleaning of the walkway either. The only time this has happened that I can think of is when someone's reported that the weeds are growing high, there's a lot of rubbish, etc. Yep, so we're just requesting that you look at closing it, and that would be much appreciated. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our CEO is taking lots of notes about that. I just move on to the next item on the agenda, if you'd like to take your seat. Oh, did you want to ask a question? Councillor Nguyen would like to ask you a point of clarification. Sorry, Ms Gregory.
Okay, that's fine.
Do you think security cameras installed there would help?
There is a security camera on Blackmore Avenue that would cover that area of the walkway. The other end of the walkway is actually a cul-de-sac, and I think probably most residents, including myself, wouldn't be happy with a camera up there. And just a point on that, most of the activity that's happening, they're wearing masks, hoodies. The police have been in attendance on several occasions on my street, Innes Place, and the offenders have actually not been apprehended because they've taken off up the alleyway. And so it's a waste of police resources too. They keep getting called out and nothing's happening. Yeah, so, yeah.
Councillor Rowe, you have a point of clarification.
I do. Thank you for the deputation, Ms Gregory. The example that you talk about where there was an abandoned trolley with clothes all throughout the PAW that you reported to the City of Wanneroo, roughly how long do you think it took for those items to be collected by Ranger Services or by the City staff?
I would say about a week. When I first reported it, I actually had government department documents that had been part of the trolley. All the rubbish was in bags on my way to work. And just a point, I do use that walkway for work. Every morning I walk to the bus and every afternoon from the bus. So the trolley was clothes all bagged up, and I saw the document through the plastic bag. By the afternoon, the bags had been pulled open and strewn right across the walkway. So there was no access for bikes or wheelchairs or whatnot. So I did actually have a look and saw the document, took photos and reported that to the Ranger Department. They told me then that there was an investigation that they would launch, but the rubbish was left there. I rang back the next day and they said that had to be left there until the investigation was complete, which was, you know, yeah. So it was actually someone else that called about the rubbish again, and it was a week later that that was cleared. Yep.
Thank you, Councillor Rowe.
And Mayor, just with your discretion, I'd ask if this item can be moved to the front of the agenda, just given the fact that there are a number of residents in the gallery, just out of courtesy to them.
Yes, we will move it forward. I'll just do the declarations and then we'll move that item straight to the next part of the agenda. So any declarations of interest by council members, including the nature and extent of which the interests are to be made at the commencement of the item of which the interest relates. Declarations of interest forms are to be completed and handed to the Chief Executive Officer. And we will go straight to item 4.
Sorry, Mayor, you haven't asked if anyone in the public gallery has any other deputations that may have not submitted beforehand, as I know there is one that is awaiting to speak.
Is there another deputation? Oh, could you come to the podium and give us your name and suburb, please?
My name's Heather Jansen. I live in Nangara at The Green, which is a lifestyle village. This petition was about providing a bus service, but I would like to respectfully request that the matter be deferred until the June meeting. The reason being that the representative from The Green and from Lakelands Village, John Quinlivan, is away at the moment. And I know that he wanted to address everybody himself at the council. And also Councillor Jordan Wright will be away until the June meeting. So he's been liaising with Jordan closely about this, and it makes sense that the actual matter be deferred until both gentlemen are present. If you are so kind as to grant a deferment, I think it would be fair to everybody, simply because both villages will have time to get themselves together and put forward their views. And I thank you for listening.
I'll just pass that on to the CEO. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you to the Deputy for the question. That is possible, but would need to be considered by Council next week. So an elected member could move a motion next Tuesday to have the matter referred to the June Council meeting. Okay. So that decision is probably best addressed next Tuesday by the elected members.
Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Mayor. I also know that the CEO has discretion to voluntarily withdraw that at a briefing session. Is that possible?
I'll let the CEO speak to that one.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My discretion is normally restricted to items which are lacking information or requiring more information that are normally then deferred by myself. In this case, the report is presented without any additional information being requested and is more rightly so to address a request from a resident which is best considered by an elected member than the Chief Executive.
Thank you. We will consider that in the next council meeting. Thank you. Okay, so we go to, actually, Mr Singh, do you want to speak to the closing of the pedestrian access way before we go any further? If we're speaking to item 4.6 now, we're going straight to item 4.6 next.
Thank you, Mayor. No, I don't intend to present those reports, but I'll be happy to answer questions.
Do I have any questions? Yes, Councillor Rowe to item 4.6.
Mayor, I have 4 questions, so it's entirely up to you if you'd prefer me to ask them. I'll ask them one at a time for the purpose of efficiency. The first question is in relation to the original intent of the public access way. For the benefit of other councillors, the public access way used to connect Blackmore Avenue to the Blackmore Primary School site. Is administration aware that the primary school has not been in operation since 2008-2009, and therefore the original intent of the PAW is no longer relevant to its current use?
Mr Singh.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Yes, we are aware of that school being closed, and that may have resulted in some numbers may have dropped, but still the PAW still provides a connection to the footpath network and also provide access to the properties which have been constructed at that particular site.
Councillor Rowe.
The second question relates to access. I don't know how visible it is on the map that's provided in the attachment, but administration speaks throughout the report about access being limited as a result of this PAW potentially being closed. Is administration aware that residents would still be able to access Blackmore Avenue through either Blackmore Park, or they'll be able to access New Park Shopping Centre through Templeton Crescent? So access to either the bus routes or to the shopping centre precinct would not be adversely impacted by the closure of this PAW. Does administration agree with that comment?
Mr Singh.
Thank you, Mayor. That's a possible that residents can use Blackmore Park, but Blackmore Park does not have a continuous footpath network across it, nor any paths which connect to the existing footpaths in surrounding streets. And also the park itself is not lit at night time.
Councillor Rowe.
The third question is around process. The deputation tonight has already spoken about the fact that rangers carry out or undertake passive surveillance of the PAW, and I'm aware that residents, when they have phoned police, will not attend the site for several hours after the incident is reported because it is not considered a life-threatening emergency. So in circumstances like that, when rangers are carrying out passive surveillance and police are not able or unwilling to come out to the site, does administration have advice to the residents how they can get early intervention when issues are happening in the public access way?
Ms Terrelink.
Yes, through you, Mayor. We don't have a particular patrol program that the Rangers undertake in terms of public access ways. However, we do respond to calls regarding antisocial behaviour on council property, and obviously we'll provide attention where the location is identified as a problem location. There is also the possibility of the area being considered for the placement of a mobile CCTV pole, which often does assist with deterring antisocial behaviour if it's deemed an appropriate location for that to happen.
Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, Mayor. Final question, and subject to this question, I will be flagging an alternative recommendation to this item next week. The final question is around the actual vacant land that Council may be aware runs adjacent to the public access way, being 13 Inez Place. It was sold at auction but has remained vacant for a period of over a year now, but prior to that was there longer, undeveloped. The vacancy of the land is contributing to the antisocial behaviour. It has led to cuts being made in the fence and litter being thrown in. So does administration have any capacity to encourage development of that land if it doesn't intend to support the closure of the PAW?
Mr Dixon.
Thank you, Mayor. The city can't force a private landowner to develop their area of land, but they certainly could encourage. I'm happy to write to the private owners to see if they've got any intentions of developing their site in the short to medium term, which would help alleviate the issue. With regard to the untidiness of the site, graffiti and litter, certainly the city's compliance officers do go out and ensure that sites can be tidied and left in a reasonable state.
Thank you. And the CEO would like to add to that.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's perhaps more just to the antisocial behaviour that's been expressed during the deputation. I know Ms Terrelink and her team have regular meetings with the officers in charge of the various police stations within our district, and I'm sure we'd be happy to provide some additional information from the deputation tonight and work with the local police service on an increased area of patrols to support the residents in that area.
Councillor Herry, do you have a question?
Thanks, Mayor. I've got two, if able. I did request earlier by email a map of the bus stops of an overlay in that actual area so we can see how that fits in. If we can have that circulated for next week, would be awesome.
Thank you.
And my question is, being that I don't actually quite understand the process of actually closing a PAW, can we have that explained to us, please?
Mr Dixon. Mr Bowring.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor. The closure process is actually approved through the Department of Land Administration as a Crown Land Reserve. It has to be closed. So an application can be made through the city and endorsed by council, and that will then go to the Department of Lands for consideration and determination as to the disposal of the Crown Reserve.
Thank you, Mr Bowring. Any other questions on this item? Yes, Deputy Mayor Treby.
Thank you, Mayor Aitken. Having lived on a public access way in Girraween for many years, I completely sympathise with your circumstances. Just to also potentially foreshadow, and I'll need to have a chat to Councillor Rowe, depending upon how the vote goes next week, also foreshadowing the potential for a late budget consideration for lighting and a pathway on the northern side of Blackmore Avenue.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Treby. Any other questions on this item? Councillor Huntley.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, I just wonder if you can clarify. On here, it says that you will investigate other suitable measures to assist in reducing and addressing the ongoing antisocial behaviour. Can you actually give us some ideas what that would look like?
Mr Singh.
Thank you, Mayor. As Director of Community and Place has outlined, we could consider the CCTV if that site is considered suitable. That's one of the measures that can be considered. Additional lighting that has been flagged, that can also be considered. and providing maybe responses if a litter or other maintenance requirements are reported. We'll try to address them more quickly.
The CEO would like to ask Mr Singh a question.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just to the Director of Assets, I would also imagine your team will go and inspect the bollard configuration to ensure it's fit for purpose.
Mr Singh.
Yeah, through the Mayor, that's one of the options which has been included in the report, that on both ends we can look at reconfigure the grab rails or bollards so that it makes it a little bit difficult for motorbikes and things like that to just fly through in that area. So it'll be trying to restrict that entry as well.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Miles.
Just a note, I'm not sure if probably Mr Singh's directorate, but on page 248 we have the image provided by administration, and in the image there's whole piles of rubbish in the image. So clearly there's a major problem there that the residents are asking for. So can we maybe make sure that that site is clean, which I think would be a planning matter.
Mr Singh.
Thank you, Mayor. The image which you see in the attachment is actually taken out from Google Maps from the street view. So that's not this point in time. That could be older picture as well. But definitely we can have another site visit and look at if there is any litter which need to be cleaned and picked up.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Are there any more questions to this item? If there are no more questions to this item, we will make a decision on a vote on that next week. Thank you everyone for coming out this evening. So we'll go to Planning and Sustainability, Approval Services. Thank you, Mr Dixon and Mr Bowring. If you want to go home now and have an earlier night, you're quite welcome to. Thank you. Thank you for coming out this evening. Okay, Mr Dixon.
Good evening, Mayor and Councillors. There are 3 items from the Planning and Sustainability Directorate on tonight's agenda. I would like to briefly introduce item 4.1, and Mr Bowring would like to introduce items 4.2 and 4.3 at the same time, given they both relate to the Narrowbup industrial area. Item 4.1 is to consider submissions on the Alkimos City Centre Structure Plan. This is a large structure plan that covers just under 200 hectares. Alkimos is identified as a secondary centre in the activity centres hierarchy, which is the second largest centre in the coastal growth corridor behind Yanchep. The structure plan includes the Alkimos train station, the site for the Alkimos Aquatic and Recreational Centre, an estimated retail floor space of up to 72,000 square metres, a bulky goods precinct, an estimated dwelling yield of just under 2,500 dwellings, and a primary school site. We did receive a total of 11 submissions, 1 submission from a local resident that was in support of the amendment, and the remaining 10 from government agencies. I would like to thank Mr Nolan for covering most of my introduction to the report in his deputation, and so I won't go over all of those same points. However, there are 3 points that I would like you to note. The first is that approximately 22% of the area is identified as public open space, which is significantly higher than the 10% minimum set out in livable neighbourhoods. As Mr Nolan pointed out, there is a parabolic dune that encircles much of the centre. If you refer to page 84 on your agenda, it highlights where the parabolic dune is located and how it encircles the centre. The intent is to provide an unbroken dune or ridge walk with pedestrian bridges over the roads to be funded by Development WA. The administration is supportive of the ridge walk, which will add character and amenity to the area and add to the sense of place. The dual public open space is also to be revegetated as natural bushland. Part of the POS network also includes the retention of the pinnacles and also a threatened ecological community. So administration is requesting a financial assessment report be provided at this subdivision stage to detail ongoing maintenance costs of the extra public open space above the 10%, in particular the provision of 5 pedestrian bridges, which would be expensive to provide but also to maintain for the city. The second point I would like to make to you is that Development WA also wants the Alkimos Activity Centre to be an exemplar of sustainable development and is targeting a 6-star Green Star Communities accreditation. Administration supports this intent. However, there is limited information in the structure plan to indicate how this is to be achieved, and administration is proposing more information on key sustainability initiatives be added to the final version of the structure plan. And the third and final point is that following the removal of the principal shared path that was intended to run within the rail reserve corridor, it was agreed at that time that there would need to be a strong pedestrian and cycle linkages to the Alkimos train station and also to Marmion Avenue. I am pleased to say that this is proposed as part of the precinct plan with a dual-use path and shared pedestrian stroke cycle path along all major roads, a shared path and on all neighbourhood connector roads, and a dedicated road cycle lane along Brindabella Parkway and what's called NS2 Road, which will be these sections will be physically protected from the road carriageway, which is a good outcome in my opinion. The city has worked very closely with Development WA and its consultants to update the structure plan to align with State Planning Policy 7.2, which requires activity centre plans such as Alkimos to be prepared as precinct plans. The precinct plan, as I mentioned, accommodates a new train station, which is scheduled to be operational by the end of this year. And the plan also proposes the main retail core between the train station and Marmion Avenue. It sets aside land for our ARC, which is important, and acknowledges the realignment of Romeo Road to protect the Pinnacle site. Administration is very supportive of the new precinct plan, which will deliver a high-quality contemporary centre, and is recommending it be approved subject to the modifications listed in attachment 8 of your agenda. Mayor, I'm happy to answer any questions that councillors may have.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Councillor Baker, I see you have a question. Would you like to ask a question?
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Yes, I can. My question is directed to Mark Dixon. Mark, I've read through the report and the attachments. It's a very comprehensive set of documents. One question I have, though, is that in relation to the core precincts within the commercial zone and certain aspects of the residential zone, will there be any height restrictions on the height of commercial or residential buildings within those core zones, please? Thank you.
Mr Dixon.
That would be developed through the next stage in the planning process, detailed local development plans, planning policy. As far as I'm aware, there's no intent to restrict heights at this point in time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Do we have any other questions? Yes, Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I actually have several. At the outset, though, I thought it was a very good document. I think Urbis have done a great job, but I also think that your team have obviously had to have a lot of input in and around this. Just some of the target points that I was going to ask you about, because it does talk in the report that while the Alkimos Town Centre is being developed early, is that going to impede the Yanchep Town Centre? Is that going to sort of push the timeline of that being started sooner or later?
Mr Dixon.
That's a good question. Certainly the intent of the district structure plan and the intent of all the planning that the city's undertaken is that Yanchep will be the strategic metropolitan centre, the major centre in the coastal growth corridor. There's no doubt that Alkimos, given its proximity and location to an more established residential community, will develop sooner. The extent to which the development of Alkimos delays or restricts or impedes the development of Yanchep is difficult for me to answer. It could be subject to a whole variety of factors, So I couldn't give you a definitive answer, but certainly the intent around the planning framework is that the major regional facilities go to the Strategic Metropolitan Centre in Yanchep, and Alkimos performs a secondary role as a secondary centre, albeit very important in terms of the development of the Coastal Growth Corridor.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. A second part of the document, and it focuses quite clearly on employment self-sufficiency for the area. And they are targeting 6 local jobs for every 10 workers in the area. But it also states in the document that that's going to be reported or managed and reported. Does that mean that that report comes back to us at council, or does it go to our economic team? How are we going to monitor those stats that are highlighted in the report?
Mr Dixon.
Through you, Mayor, so I don't think the intent would be for administration to report back to council formally through a council report. However, certainly would be the intent for the city to work with Development WA and our economic development team to monitor progression of employment within the centre, and if there are any issues, work with the landowners and the proponent to ensure that we get back on track to achieve the employment self-sufficiency targets. That's not to say that we couldn't report, not whilst formally, we could report informally to council in terms of progress.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Councillor Miles, you have another question?
Thank you, Mayor. The other part of the document that I was keen to understand, and you have answered, you've already stipulated one part of that, is how does council manage the green, I was going to say ring road, dual path, and I'm quite excited about that. I think it's a great idea. But also in the document it does talk about, and Mr Noland has actually articulated also, that there's going to be 20,000 trees planted within that 200 hectare area, and I guess that's in conjunction with our parks team. So that's going to be more than likely on top of whatever we do as a city, is that right?
Mr Dixon?
Not necessarily. I think the intent behind the document, which is laudable, is certainly to provide a high level of tree canopy cover. 20,000 trees is a significant number. That would be within both the public and private realm, so certainly along within public open space, within the dunal, the parabolic dune, but also primarily within the public realm along the streetscapes, which I think is one of the intents behind the document.
Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. The other part of the precinct plan, whilst it does highlight the 6 or 7 or so precincts, and they will be delivered in a staged approach, which is the correct and right way to do it. And whilst it identifies the possibility of a medical centre, wouldn't there be a need for something a little bit more substantial than a medical centre?
Mr Dixon.
I'm not a medical expert by any stretch in terms of what the requirement would be, but from a planning principle perspective, as I mentioned before, the intent would be to have the regional facilities, hospital, the larger facilities within Yanchep. Whatever the need for the local community in the short to medium term could be accommodated within Alkimos. So certainly an appropriate location would be within the activity centre close to public transport. The extent of that, I couldn't give you a definitive answer. That's something that I think the Health Authority will be able to provide more information on.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Councillor Miles, do you have another question?
Yep, thank you, Mayor. We've talked about this before in council, in other meetings, and also when we've been to the UDIA. Obviously, this is a plan for a long period of time, 30 or 40 years. In this document, it talks about having an interim development policy. So you might have a single-storey centre, a building type of thing somewhere which is supposed to have eventually maybe a 5 or 10-storey building. It does talk about having an interim development for possibly 10 years. I just want you to understand how administration would police that. How would it give that out by a development application, and it would be a condition that the building can only be there for 10 years, or how is that monitored from administration's point of view?
Mr Dixon?
You're right, in terms of the document, it does talk about staging and interim development, and there are a number of criteria that would need to be met, not just the one that you pointed out. This is something we would develop and work on with the proponent in terms of the detail, but the likelihood is if there's a development proposal that's submitted, there would be a time-limited approval that would be granted for that. Obviously, people could, depending on the staging and growth of the centre, applicants could look to extend that, but that's one mechanism through a condition of planning approval to time limit the approval.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Councillor Herridge would like to ask a question.
Thank you, Mayor. Just in regards to the schools, that I can probably understand why they've taken it away from the centre. Just wanted to make sure that it is such a large area, there's only one being planned as a primary school. 2 parts, just to ensure that the correct boundary is given to the school and it's not on the main road. And will those kids fit into the high school that has the intake?
Mr Dixon?
Certainly there's been a lot of consideration in terms of the location of the primary school, and one of the modifications that we've required is that the road network surrounds that, so there's opportunities for parking. In terms of the area of land, that's one of the other issues that I think that was raised in terms of having an oval adjacent to that, something that we can consider or we can request as a modification to the plan, that sufficient land is accommodated for the primary school if there's a need for an oval in addition. In terms of the other school, I think that's something that we can discuss with the Department of Education. There's certain requirements that the Department of Education have, which sets minimum standards in terms of space. The structure plan needs to ensure that that's accommodated.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Are there any other questions on this item? Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, my question is addressed to Mr Dixon. Just indirectly leading on from what Councillor Herridge said a few seconds ago, of course I'm well aware that Romeo Road will intersect with Marmion Avenue, and to the west of that intersection, of course, is Graceville Boulevard. In the north western corner of that intersection is St James Anglican School, Anglican Community School. Of course, that school has a current enrolment for around 1,000 kids, I think. Of course, at the moment, that's a stretch of that length of carriageway from that intersection, namely the intersection of Graceville Boulevard through to the next roundabout to the west. That is only a single lane road, either way, single lane. Is it intended to dual that road with dual lanes in both directions, given the anticipated additional traffic which will be entering and exiting that intersection? I'm just concerned about traffic volumes and numbers, because that intersection will be a very, very busy intersection, obviously. Thank you.
Mr Dixon.
So just to be clear, this isn't part of this structure plan. That's a separate site on the opposite side of Marmion Avenue from the structure plan location. Mr Bowring, I think, could provide a bit more detail in terms of whether that's intended to be dualled.
Mr Bowring.
Thank you, through you, Madam Mayor. Yes, certainly the administration's been liaising with the school in relation to the access to and capacity of Graceville Boulevard. There's a design, ultimate design, which would allow for dualling of Graceville Boulevard in the future if the traffic volumes demand it. At the moment, the traffic volumes are well below the need to do that, but ultimately it could be.
Just a
Thank you, Mr Bowring. Councillor Baker, is that regarding Graceville Boulevard and St James College, or regarding the structure plan? Your next question.
Well, the two are linked, so to speak, in terms of that key intersection. Romeo Road to Marmion Avenue is a massive, key, important, will be a
yes,
very,
I understand
very
that's a key intersection, but at the moment we're talking about the structure plan of the township of Alkimos.
I will not ask questions outside the boundaries of the structure plan.
Yeah. Do you have a question about the structure plan at all, Councillor Baker?
I do, but the question relates to a point on Graceville Boulevard, which is only a few metres outside the boundary of the structure plan. So, but it's outside the structure.
Okay, thank you.
So therefore, I can't answer.
Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. In 2.8 of the document, it talks about bicycle access and end-to-trip facilities, and I'm happy with the provision of those and the actual number of showers and change room for bike parking spaces. Is that to do with the train station, or is that something the city would have to look at with some of its community buildings as well?
Mr Dixon.
It would be both.
Okay, and you have another question, do you, Councillor Miles?
Yeah, the other question is, obviously, where this development is, and as I say, I think it's a fantastic development. The one concern I have, it doesn't show any linkages over the future Mitchell Freeway into what will be the Alkimos Regional Sporting Facility. It just sort of ends at that point, and there's no more view. Is administration looking at working with the developer to create I guess, a cycle path or footpath that will be going over the proposed route?
Mr Dixon.
I may take that on notice. Certainly there's Romeo Road, which is obviously the link across, and the regional open space is immediately to the north of Romeo Road on the eastern side of the freeway. So that would provide an access. In terms of, I'd have to go back to the district structure plan, so I'll take that question on notice in terms of if there's any further crossings that's intended across Malmedy Avenue. I don't think there is, but I'll take it on notice and provide a detailed response.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Any other questions? Yes, Councillor Miles.
Yeah, just the, it obviously incorporates the city's aquatic centre, future aquatic centre, but it does also talk about prominent location 4, which is the pinnacles, which Mr Nolan spoke about because of the realignment of the road. Now, I was under the impression when we were originally advised about that was a possible Aboriginal site, yet the sketch in there sort of has those pinnacles in maybe some sort of parkland with a building overlooking them. So are they visible now for anybody to climb up over, or are they supposed to be a protected site?
Mr Dixon.
In terms of how they're visible now, I don't think anybody really has that much access to the site. It's private land, but the intent is that the pinnacles will be retained within public open space. Now, the detail of how that will occur obviously is too detailed for this level and stage of planning. The important part in a strategic document of this nature is to ensure that the integrity of and the importance of the Aboriginal heritage site is to be protected and maintained and retained in perpetuity.
Thank you, Ms Dixon. Councillor Nguyen has a question.
Just in relation to the reference non-preferred land uses in the land mix use, does that mean, on page, for example, 54, does that mean it's a discretionary use or it's a non-permitted use? So, for example, on
page 54?
Page 54, precinct 2, it's listed service station as a non-preferred land use, and page 58, it's listed non-preferred land use to include fast food and bulky show goods and service station.
Okay. Mr Bowring, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, that was quite a specific question, but we understand it to be that they will be adjusted in the schedule of modifications to identify whether they're prohibited or permitted uses within the relevant zones.
Thank you, Mr Bowring. Do you have another question, Councillor Nguyen?
So can you clarify, so the ones that is listed on the non-preferred land uses, would then that go into the prohibited uses, or is that going to be a discretionary use?
Mr Bowring?
Thank you. I'll take that on notice because I can't quite identify that right now.
Okay, Councillor Miles, did you have another question?
Yeah, I do. I'm nearly there, Mayor. Just in the built form controls area of the document, and you was asked a question about height limits, but there actually is minimum height limits for certain areas like main streets and the like of 7.5 metres. And whilst I don't mind a minimum height limit, how does that correlate with trying to get a use of the land in the next, say, 10 or 15 years, rather than have a site vacant for 50 years like they still have in the city of Joondalup Town Centre? So if you're saying in this that it's got to be up to 7.5 metres, Is that too high to manage the transitional process that we talked about before?
Mr Baring? Mr Dixon?
Yeah, I'll take that on notice because it's a very detailed question. So I'm happy to provide a detailed answer to the question.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Did you have another question, Councillor Miles?
Other than, Mayor, it is a fabulous document, and I enjoyed reading it with some of the new ideas, and that's why I'm asking the questions, and because it almost gets to a point where we might have to have committee meetings to deal with these large documents. The general resident precincts and the like are going to be very good. A bit concerned about the vehicle access parking. I noticed, Mr Dixon, that you're limiting some parking in some parts where you've got the, you might have some residential, but you might also have a main street. So you're going to limit the building's parking capacity, obviously whether it be underground or upstairs, I don't know. But coming back to parking and an issue that Councillor Huntley and I have, as you know, in Banksia Grove, is that going to be overcome in these precincts where people can park a car on their driveway?
Mr Dixon?
That was the subject of a separate report from the last council meeting where we're obviously focused on ensuring that there was sufficient room for vehicles to park in front of garages. In looking at the parking issues associated with this town centre, there will be a parking management strategy. It will evolve over time. There will be reciprocal parking. You'd expect all of that within a major centre of this nature with all of the facilities that are being planned. So that is something where we would work with Development WA in preparing that parking management strategy.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Are there any other questions from the councillors? If there are no more questions, we'll go to item 4.2 and 4.3 with Mr Bowring.
Thank you, through you, Madam Mayor. Tonight I'm introducing two items on the agenda. 4.2, consideration of Amendment 202 to District Planning Scheme Number 2 following advertising, and item 4.3, consideration of Amendment Number 7 to Neerabup Industrial Area Agreed Local Structure Plan Number 17 following advertising also. Both of these reports together deal with the finalisation of the review of the planning framework for the Neerabup Industrial Area and address separate parts of this framework. The reports have been prepared following the undertaking of formal consultation on Amendment 202 and Amendment 17 to ASP, the structure plan. Administration has been developing the revised planning work for the past several years and these are now being presented to Council to consider making recommendations to the Minister for Planning and the WAPC respectively for their determination. For the purposes of the review, the amendment to ASP 17 is the primary area of focus, as the structure plan is the document which largely guides the subdivision and development of land for industrial purposes. During the consultation period, the reports indicate 13 submissions were received. However, there was an additional submission received during that time from the Quinns Rock Environmental Group. Councillors have today been provided with a copy of the submission and the reason why it was not included in these reports. Given the clarification that has now been provided by the group, these reports will be updated to include the submission for formal consideration by Council at next week's meeting. The issues raised in the submission will be addressed in the schedule of submissions and a response provided by Administration for Council's consideration. It is notable that the NIA, as Mr Dixon has outlined earlier, that it contains around 300 hectares of land that has either already been set aside for conservation or requires further detailed investigation by the landowner to determine whether that land should be conserved or is capable of development. The proposed structure plan amendment addresses this by recommending the structure plan not actually apply over this northwestern section of the structure plan area. And actually pulls the boundary of the structure plan back. The work to identify the environmental values and whether or not it's capable of development will be carried out by the Development WA at a future time. The key issue that was raised during the submissions that are detailed in the report is that of vehicular access to lots fronting major roads within the NIA. Please note this does not include access to Flynn Drive, to which there will be no direct access. We've had feedback from Main Roads on that, and they don't support any access from any businesses directly onto Flynn Drive. The traffic report that underpins the current structure plan recommended no access on lots fronting major roads within the estate, and this intent was brought out in the review to specifically identify areas where access restrictions should be imposed in the structure plan. The purpose of preventing direct access to lots from major roads such as Pedrick Road and Altitude Drive was to ensure that there would be an efficient and safe movement of heavy vehicles on these roads, and that movement would not be interrupted by large vehicles entering and exiting multiple lots along these roads. In this regard, Pedrick Road will be designed as a RAV7 capable road, which means that it will be able to accommodate large vehicles up to 36 metres. This is seen as a significant benefit to the development of the estate and the nature of industrial uses that may seek to locate in the NIA as a result of this capability. The subdivision design was to reflect this objective by ensuring secondary roads will provide access to lots on these major roads and facilitate these large vehicle movements. However, through recent proposals by Development WA for subdivision and specific development applications, a blanket prohibition of direct access has recently been identified as a concern. Whilst the objective of ensuring free movement of heavy traffic along the major roads of the NIA is important for the long-term efficiency of the area, administration has worked with Development WA to develop a performance-based set of criteria to determine whether suitable access can be provided from these major roads. The criteria for determining direct access is set out in Attachment 3 to Item 4.3 on page 224 of the agenda, and is a recommended modification to the advertised version of the structure plan. Other matters have been raised and are addressed in detail in the schedule of submissions attached to the reports, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr Bowring. Do we have any questions on either of the items? Yes, Councillor Miles.
Yeah, just a quick one. I do support the amendment. The only question I have is if I was to acquire the land and build a data centre, which we know is a box, we fill it up with computers for storage, it talks about parking as one bay, I read it, for every 400 square metres. The only issue I have with that, what happens, say after 5-10 years, I no longer use it as a data centre and I want to start using it as an intensive aquaculture inside, how do I then accommodate the parking, bearing in mind the problem we're now having in Wanneroo because of the change of uses?
Mr Bowring.
Thank you, through you, Madam Mayor. Yes, it's a common problem across not just data centres but other warehousing and office uses as they change over. Each application, we have our standards and we have various ratios in our scheme and policies for car parking, but we do look at each development on its merits and whether or not they create a demand. So each use that comes before us can argue whether or not they need more or less parking than the relevant standards. Where there is insufficient bays on site, it will be up to the owners to work that through to ensure that they can accommodate their needs on the site, and we'll work with them to make sure that they can achieve that.
Thank you, Mr Bowring. Any other questions on this item or these items? If there are no more questions, we'll move on to the next, which is assets. Mr Singh, thank you. Mr Singh, we don't need to speak to item 1 because that'll be sorted out next week. Which items would you like to speak to?
Thank you, Mayor. I don't intend to speak on the other 3 items, but I'll be happy to take questions on the items on the agenda.
Okay. Any questions on any of the items on the agenda under assets, please? Yes, Councillor Rowe.
I do have a question in relation to 4.4, Mayor. Obviously, you're referring to the fact that the vote will occur next week, but a question on the report itself, can I ask?
Yes, Mr Rowe.
It mentions in the report, Director, that quorum is unable to be met, or there's a risk of quorum not being met in that group. Is that due to a higher number of absences than usual, either from community members or council delegates who are on the committee?
Mr Singh.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I think that's correct. We don't get full participation from the nominated delegates and the community reps.
Okay, any more questions on item 4.4? There are no more questions on items 4.4. Is there any questions on item 4.5? And I do take into account that Councillor Rowe's left the meeting, has he? Councillor Wright has left the meeting? Yes. Yeah, okay. Do I have any questions on item 4.5, noting that Councillor Wright did want to be in attendance for this, but we'll discuss that later at the next meeting. Any questions on this item? On the deputation tonight? Yes, and we've spoken to item 4.6. So now we go to Parks and Conservation, item 4.7, the response to the petition about the plane trees. Do we have any questions on that item? Yes, Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mayor. I have quite a number, so I'll start, and then if you ever want to go to another councillor, let me know.
Not a problem.
So I just noticed out of the 84 claims that have been made, that has been referenced on page 252, how many related to London planes in all three categories? Because you did mention 2 of the claims later were because of tree roots, but I'm just wondering about tree failure and tree branch debris as well.
Mr Cheddleberg.
Through you, Madam Mayor, thank you. There were 2 actual claims made through damage to infrastructure from London plane trees across the data that was provided. Councillor Smith?
Yeah, so infrastructure, you're meaning like building property, and so that would have been quite expensive. Is that, can I clarify that in terms of infrastructure, or?
Mr Cheddleberg?
Through you, Madam Mayor, claims themselves can be quite broad and extensive in regards to they're dealt on a case-by-case basis through the city's insurer, LGIS. From memory, I think they were from tree roots rather than damage from failure of trees, from egress into properties.
Councillor Smith?
Thank you. I noted that on page 256 and 257 is a summary of the street trees found in the suburb of Butler, and noting that we're in the context of the petitions for London plane trees, would it be possible for the summary to have added information about London trees specifically about a lot of these different things? For example, you've got a bullet point in 258, like 158 of these are noted to be high priority. How many trees are recommended for removal? I'm just wondering if there's trends with different types of trees that would be interesting to know, but also if there's trends if the London planes are featuring highly as a percentage of those ones. For example, I do note that 122 trees are noted as requiring corrective root heaves to pass, many of which are London plane trees. So I loved that that one had a London plane specific information, and 122 of 301 London plane trees, that's approximately 40%. So it does indicate quite a high number in that. So would that be possible to get more information about the types of trees to get us a better understanding of the degree of problem with London planes?
Mr Cheddleberg?
Through you, Madam Mayor, we can certainly interrogate the data and look if we can break it down specifically by species with the problems associated with each species. I will need to review the audit report that we've got for that, and if we have the data, then we can certainly provide it.
Councillor Smith, you've got more questions?
Yeah, thank you. Would it be possible to have a description of what root heave requires and what that looks like?
Mr Cheddleberg?
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, we can provide an example with some photos to represent that.
Councillor Smith?
I think I am good. Hopefully the rest of the answers will come with more data. Thank you.
Okay, do I have any more questions on item 4.7? Councillor Nguyen?
Just in relation to the insurance claims, how does that start? So is it a complaint from a resident and then an investigation occurs and then we submit the claim to insurance? Can you just explain the process?
Mr Chettleworth?
Through you, Madam Mayor, the city has an existing process in regards to claims from residents from city trees in regards to damage to their properties. So a resident can make a claim through the city, and then they are passed on to our insurer for an assessment.
Thank you, Mr Chettleworth. Do you have another question, Mr Nguyen? Councillor Nguyen, sorry.
Yes, and does a resident receive a report whether the tree is impacting on the property, or do they get an update? And if so, what is the mechanism if they were to contest the decision by the city?
Mr Chettleworth?
Through you, Madam Mayor, once the claim is made to the city's insurer, the insurer will liaise directly with the resident that's made the claim or the claimant. If the insurer in their investigation process requires more information from the city specific to that tree, or works and maintenance that's been undertaken on that specific tree, or surrounding infrastructure, then they will ask the city for that information as part of their investigation in making an assessment on the claim.
Thank you, Mr Chettleworth. Any more questions? Yes, I'll go to Councillor Miles first.
Yeah, just a couple of points on the damage and insurance, Mayor. With the council insurance, which I'm assuming is LGIS, do they actually cover root damage, or do they only cover branches falling from a tree?
Mr Chettleworth?
Through the chair, my understanding of LGIS and experience with LGIS in claims made in regards to trees is that they will consider any claim on its merits, on its individual circumstances made to within the claim.
Thank you, Mr Chettleworth. Councillor Miles?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. The other question I have, not sure if the CEO wants to answer this one, is do we have a gap? Are we responsible for the first $1,000, $5,000 of a claim, or do we just automatically send it off to the risk assessors to see whether the damage was in fact a tree provided by the city? So it goes back to the process on what Councillor Nguyen was asking.
Mr Chettleworth, is there an excess on any claim that we make for our tree damage to residents' houses?
Through you, Madam Mayor, that's a question we'll have to take on notice and provide some clarification on.
Thank you, Mr Chettleworth. Councillor Baker?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a quick question to Mr Chettleworth, just regarding the issue of ratepayers or owners of property, or for that matter, even renters of property, making claims against the city in respect of a tree damage, howsoever caused, and caused by whatever described or genus of tree applicable. Has the city, in fact, ever been sued for not paying out such a claim for the tort of trespass to land or for the tort of private nuisance? Do you have any knowledge of the city ever having been involved in litigation of that kind as a result of damage caused by any species of tree? Thank you.
I'm going to pass that to the CEO. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Baker, for the question. I'll have to take that on notice, and nothing comes to mind, but I will have a look.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think it's well overdue that trees are given a monetary value. My question is, if we take a tree down, for example, that's worth $6,000, how is that monetary value that has been applied to that tree going to assist us going forward? So if we take a tree down for $6,000, what happens now that we've put that value on trees in general, what happens if that tree is taken out? How does that monetary value help that tree to stay in place?
Mr Chettleberg.
Through you, Madam Mayor. Whilst the city uses a number of instruments to assess trees and measure trees from a risk point of view or a monetary point of view, we apply the Halliwell system, which is an internationally used monetary value applied to trees based on a number of factors, including tree size, life expectancy, suitability within the streetscape. Whilst we applied that as a measurement across a number of assessments in the overall audit, if a tree was to be removed, if it failed, our policy is that we replace a tree that we remove, so we don't actually use that monetary value from a replacement point of view to any effect. We don't record monetary values as an asset for the city. It's just one of a range of measurements that we capture through an audit.
Thank you, Mr Chettleberg. Councillor Parker.
So just subsequent to that, so what we're trying to achieve in development going forward is to encourage residents that have a tree planted on their verge to ensure that that tree remains on the verge. So we have a value to the tree, whether it be a metre or 3 metres or 5 metres, to that tree on that new verge. I was under the impression that by applying a value to that tree on that verge would be a deterrent to people just driving over it or just pulling it out. So that is why I had a feeling that we were going to the value of a tree. So the question is, I thought that was what was going to going forward. We were trying to stop people taking trees out by putting that monetary value on them, but you're saying that we in fact are not doing that. Sorry.
The CEO just wants to speak to this quickly.
Through you, Madam Mayor. I think Councillor Parker is a very good question that, from my recollection, created a conversation in terms of a local law and whether we wanted to follow some other councils that provide a penalty to protect trees within verges. But Mr Chettleberg might want to add, but I think, I can remember council exploring some examples of other neighbouring councils that within their local laws provide a value and a penalty for the removal of a tree.
Mr Chettleberg.
Through you, Madam Mayor, just to add to the CEO's comments, there are councils within the metropolitan area and across Australia that apply a percentage of a tree value as a bond on development sites on verges adjacent to developments within the road reserve. Noting also our street tree policy is up for a review in December 2023, so it's certainly something that we can consider as part of that review.
Thank you, Mr Chettleberg. Any other questions? Yes, Deputy Mayor Treby.
Oh, look, it's just a very quick one. And this is an interesting line of questioning. Grant, do we know whether or not, and I'm not sure whether it's yourself or Haminda or it's more of a corporate finance question, whether or not we recognise trees within our assets register if we've given them a value and it's technically a public tree, is it recognised on the assets register?
Mr Singh, Mr Singh or Mr Chettleberg, whoever. Mr Singh.
Through you, Madam Mayor. We're currently undertaking street tree audits suburb by suburb across the city. We've currently covered about 18 suburbs across the city. We're doing probably 3 suburbs per year. We are obtaining that data, so we are applying the Halliwell valuation system as part of those assessments of the individual trees. We don't currently list them trees as an asset, so whilst we would have an accumulative figure of those areas that we've audited, they're not part of our overall asset base or recognised or recorded in that presently.
I'd just like to remind councillors, just quickly, before we go to that, that we're not looking at our street tree policy. we're responding to a petition about the damage from London plane trees. So we've sort of gone a little bit broad rather than specific on what we're talking to. But Deputy Mayor Treby, would you like to add a further question?
On the basis of the way you've just phrased that, probably not, but I'll ask it anyway because there might be an applicable accounting standard, an Australian accounting standard, or there might which reflects the international standard that might apply in that circumstance. But I'll take that as rhetorical, and you'll probably end up, gentlemen, taking that on notice.
Thank you. Any other questions about the London plane trees in the streets of Wanneroo? Yes, Councillor Herridge.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick one for next week, because I'm sure you won't know this off the top of your head. Can you remind us for next week what the canopy cover is in Butler?
Thank you, Mr Chettleberg.
Through you, Madam Mayor. It currently sits around 2.5% to 3% on.
Is that all?
Thank you.
So the information that we obtained through the urban forest strategy that was adopted by Council late in 2022, from the flyovers we had, we sit around 2.5% to 3% currently.
Thank you for that, Mr Chettleberg. Any other questions related to the flame trees? Yes, Councillor Smith.
Thank you. When you're doing your tree audit, I was wondering if you're able to, and I think it might be a hard thing to do, but in talking with different residents, they mentioned that some of the more troublesome London plane trees, when they were put in, didn't have containment root bags, I think, to help contain the roots. So I was wondering if when they're being inspected, is that something that you can inspect? Because if they haven't, they would obviously be ones that you'd want to keep a closer eye on.
Mr Chettleberg.
Through you, Madam Mayor, some trees when they're planted, and most of the London planes that we've got planted across the city, we've inherited that were planted by developers as they established their subdivisions and estates. Whilst we are aware we have root barriers, physical root barriers in some of those areas, generally through streetscapes we don't have root barriers, but in those areas that we have audited, and in Butler in particular, where we know we've got 301 trees of 4,500 trees, once they're on our register, and we know the percentage of root heave and so forth, we have an indication of when we need to go back and re-inspect those. So we do have trees that are on a regular inspection, depending on the feedback we're getting through the audits.
Thank you, Mr Chettleberg. I know Councillor Huntley's been waiting for a while, but I'll let Bronwyn Smith ask a second one, then I'll go to Councillor Hunt.
I appreciate that. This follows exactly on for what you were saying, because I just noticed that there were 0 trees requiring inspection in 6 months and 1 tree on 12 months. But I was wondering about how regularly all the ones that you do re-inspect, because you've got 158 of these are noted to be high priority, because I think a high majority may be London plane trees. So how regularly are they checked? That would be great to know. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Councillor Huntley. Did you have a question? I thought you had your hand up for a question.
Can we get the answer first?
Oh, sorry. Yes, Mr Chettleberg.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'll have to take that question on notice. When high priority, and I'll need to check on the data, but could be just high priority as in requiring works, so some remedial works at the time, rather than being on a high priority for re-inspection. So we'll clarify that by looking at the audits and provide some supplementary information.
Thank you, Mr Chettleberg. Sorry, Councillor Smith. Councillor Huntley.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I noticed that when you look at the overhead picture of Butler, the London planes seem to be very randomised. They're not actually in a specific order. Is that because some of these trees have obviously reseeded over the years? Because they're around about, it takes about 20 years for some of these trees to get as large as they are. So in that respect, if they are randomised, some people have 2 or 3 trees in front of them and then some people have none. How are we going to control that in the future?
Mr Chettleberg.
Through you, Madam Mayor, the existing plane trees would have been planted as mature trees or established trees, they wouldn't have seeded. Depending on the estates and the individual streetscapes across the city, some streets would have been planted as theme streets, back in establishment. So there will be promenades of London planes or single species trees, the same as we've got Norfolk Island pines and other species throughout the city. As far as the sporadic nature, in the last few years, the city's taken, with support of council, really seen the investment in their trees, and our auditing processes have improved to know what trees that we have. In the past, we had no way to really determine where trees had been removed by residents thinking they had a right to remove them. So there may be some that have been removed and we haven't known about at the time. That may result in trees looking quite sporadic where they are. Also, if trees have been removed in the last few years under our street tree policy that I think we adopted in 2018, we replace a tree once it's been removed. That may not have always been the case. So our management of trees is improved over the last 8 or 9 years to manage trees being removed. But yeah, it's an interesting insight, but I don't have a more of a clear answer than that.
Thank you, Mr Chettleberg. Councillor Huntley, you have another question?
Yeah, I just have one more question. If we do have to remove trees because they are damaging properties, how are we going to look at the urban forest, the canopy, and how are we going to address the heat map island as well?
Mr Chettleberg.
Through you, Madam Mayor. The Urban Forest Strategy adopted in 2022 identifies some targets for each suburb. So we know, as I spoke about before, we've currently got a canopy cover of 2.5% to 3% in Butler. So I think one of the targets in the Urban Forest Strategy is to increase that canopy cover up to 5% by 2040. So we will continue to do our audits, which will identify current state of trees, but also identify those planting opportunities for infill planting, and we'll undertake more, utilising satellite imagery of heat maps and also other technology to identify where trees can be planted, and certainly in alignment with our action plan and the Urban Forest Strategy, look to have our suburbs with a minimum 5% cover by 2040.
Thank you, Mr Chettleberg. Councillor Huntley.
Just final question, just for the interest of the public, regarding the urban heat map, how hot at the moment is Butler, and what are we trying to bring that down by using tree canopy to?
Mr Chettleberg.
Through you, Madam Mayor, we don't have the data of how hot it is. So the satellite imagery that we do have, or the infrared that we do have, creates layers of heat, but we don't have the individual temperatures represented in that data. But what that data does allow us to do is focus in on those hotspots or those urban heat island areas and concentrate on those for some concentrated planting in the first instance.
Thank you, Mr Chettleberg. Are there any questions on item 4.7? Okay, if there are no more questions, we go to item 4.8, which is the removal of the response to the petition to remove 2 verge trees in 2 residential properties in Wanneroo. If we can have questions related specifically to that item and not to our heat map, emergement canopy, which we've discussed a lot at the moment. Councillor Rowe.
I can assure you of the relevance of the question, Mayor. The petitioners spoke about 2 factors in their petition. The first is that the age of the residents means that they don't believe it is safe for them to be tending to the gutters and the leaves and the trees themselves anymore. And with respect, obviously, more than several decades have passed since the trees were planted. And the second factor they talk about is the financial climate as it is. The cost of services to clean those gutters has gone up considerably. So given the financial aspect of the petition and the health factors of the petitioners, is administration aware of any volunteer or subsidised service that is available, particularly to aged pensioners? And if such information is available, can it be shared with the petitioners given the particular concerns they raised in their petition?
Ms Terrelink.
Thank you, Mayor. There may be services that are available to assist. I would need to take that on notice though and research what organisations may be available to assist and provide that information to council members and the petitioners.
Thank you. Are there any other questions on this item? Yes, Councillor Miles.
Just further to Councillor Rowe's question, and obviously there's several parts of the petition that the owners of Milstead Way have asked. Is it possible then for the city to actually put on their guttering the guard that you can put in to stop the leaves filling up the guttering? Is administration able to do that in this case, being that Councillor Rose suggested that they are seniors in place?
Mr CEO.
For you, Madam Mayor, can I just make sure I've got the question right? Is it, would the City of Wanneroo install the gutter barriers? Gutter guards. That would not normally be an action a local government would take, but we would be guided by council. But there is many properties within the City of Wanneroo. But I think Ms Terrelink's offer of seeing if there is an agency that might be able to provide support to clean, that might also extend to installing the gutter guards.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? Yes, Councillor Parker. On the Marangaroo tree.
I know you were going to say that. But just the last two issues that have come up, the last two things on the agenda that have come up, does the city have a way of educating residents that perhaps are in a situation like this to the benefits of the trees on their property? And if not, going forward, is that something that we can do? So the thing is, are we educating our residents to the importance of the trees at this point?
The Mr CEO will speak to that.
For you, Madam Mayor, I think that's a very good question. I think council is always trying to educate our community on how we can partner together to be more sustainable. But we do know there is a lot of interest from our community on tree and urban tree canopy, but also heat map. So I think that's a good suggestion that we perhaps could take on board to focus a bit more on educating on the environmental value of trees. There's a lot of research that talks about health and wellbeing benefits of trees and natural ecosystems as well.
Thank you, Mr CEO. Any more questions on item 4.8, the two trees in Marangaroo? Okay, if there are no more questions on the two trees in Marangaroo, we'll go to Waste Services, item 4.9, the Welga E-Quote 22135, commingled recyclable sorting and processing services. Do we have any questions on that item? Councillor Miles.
This is a tender, so can we ask questions on the tender?
Not on the confidential parts of the document.
I did want to ask questions on that.
You'll wait until we go.
I do.
You do? So we'll have to go. Can we defer that item until our confidential item and go behind closed doors at the same time for both items?
Yep, good idea.
So I'll do that later. So we will go to community and place. Ms Terrelink.
Thank you, Mayor. There are three items this evening from the Community in Place Directorate, and I was just proposing to briefly introduce item 4.12, which is the horse exercise area at Timely Hostess Mews. So, as Council will recall, we've had a request to formalise Lot 124 Timely Hostess Mews as a horse exercise area, and also consider some restrictions in regard to the usage of the area by dogs. So we have undertaken a community engagement process to understand from the community on both aspects what their thoughts are. So the first one is on designating designating the area formally as a horse exercise area, and also then on whether there should be limitations in terms of dogs. The community feedback indicated that there was support certainly for having the area designated for horses as a horse exercise area, and also there was a lot of comment on prohibiting dogs from the area as well because of the interaction between horses and dogs that has previously occurred. So under the provisions of the city's animals local law, there is now a process that we need to go through to formally requests or to formally provide public notice that we are intending to make a determination in accordance with the animals local law, which would permit horses to be exercised on lot 124 Timely Hostess Mews. Once we have undertaken that process, the intention would be that we would then consider the submissions received and also at the same time consider the provisions then of the Dog Act in terms of potentially either restricting how dogs utilise the space or prohibiting dogs from the space. But until such time as we understand that we're progressing with it as a horse exercise area, we thought we would wait until we've done that process and then consider the issue with the dogs.
Thank you, Ms Terrelink. Any questions? Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, my question is addressed to Ms Terrelink. Just looking ahead in the future, just assuming that it's permissible for horses to be exercised on lot 124 Timely Hostess Mews Marigina, is it also necessary for the owner of the land to obtain a planning consent of any description? Or can anyone exercise a horse on land they own in Marigina or elsewhere? I would have thought not, but do you think there might be another step where there's a need for a DA to be filed because it may constitute a change of use? The exercising of horses. It gets back to definitions. Thank you.
Ms Terrelink.
Thank you, Mayor. So in terms of lot 124 Timely Hostess Mews, it's actually the city that is the owner of that land. The Director of Planning and Sustainability may be able to comment on whether it would require a development approval. I'm not sure.
Mr Dixon.
Through you, Mayor, no, it wouldn't require a development application. It's already zoned parks and recreation and it would be used for that purpose.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Any other questions on this item? Councillor Huntley.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a question. There's an issue that I'm thinking about with the fact that we are going to grow, obviously, East Wanneroo, and East Wanneroo is going to encroach into Marginia quite significantly. Now, by actually disallowing the dogs on that land to be exercised, how forward-thinking are we looking that horses are not going to be on that piece of ground all the time, probably in the morning and in the evening, and probably on weekends? If we limit dogs completely, we'll actually be taking a huge chunk of parkland out from residents, future residents that may need to walk their dogs on there. That could create problems in the future. So I'll actually foreshadow an amendment to this just to see if we can clarify something for the future. But what's your view of East Wanneroo coming through?
Thank you.
Terrelink.
And through you, Mayor, I guess this is a point in time consideration. There's certainly provisions under both the Animals Local Law and also the Dog Act that would allow those determinations to be changed in future. So if there was a requirement with the development of East Wanneroo to change either it being a horse exercise area under the Animals Local Law, or there was a requirement if we do go down the path of restricting or prohibiting dogs, there is certainly provisions under the Dog Act that would allow that to be reconsidered and for a determination to be made at that point in time.
Thank you, Ms Terrelink. Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. It's good to see this before us, Ms Terrelink. It's been a while. I understand the horse owners' concerns about dogs, and most of their dogs are familiar with horses and obviously ride with their dogs on all those bridle trails around Mariginiup and Dundebar that lead to this. It was always designed to lead to this point. Coming back to the horse part, and I'm not sure, because we had this discussion when Councillor Sengali was here to do with Gum Blossom, where we allowed a portion of the parkland to have dogs on leads, and the other part of it they weren't allowed to be in. Is it then possible, and I know that Councillor Huntley's foreshadowed possibly an amendment, but is it possible that we could say that if there are no horses on the property, you can have a dog not on a lead, but if there are horses on the property, you have to have your dog on a lead? That would then allow those dogs that are already used to large animals to possibly be on an extended lead alongside the horse rider in that locality. So I don't know whether you've had a look at that mix. I know it's always a policing matter, but this is a very, very large site.
Ms Terrelink.
Through you, Mayor, it is possible under the Dog Act to designate particular areas as on lead or off lead for dogs, as we did do with Gum Blossom. That was probably quite defined in that it was one oval in particular that was the shared use oval with the school, but we could, we could put up signage and that type of thing. I guess, as Councillor Miles has alluded to, often the compliance with that and the policing of that can be a bit challenging, but we could certainly consider that as an option.
Thank you, Ms Terrelink. Any other questions? Yes, Deputy Mayor Treby.
Just further to the, thank you, Mayor Aiken, just further to the response that Mrs Terrelink just mentioned, if that advice could also come back and if you could arrange to put a risk lens across that advice as to what the potential conflict issues would be if there were dogs on or off the leash, with its intended purpose being predominantly for horses. So if that could have that risk lens across that, that would be, I think, valuable.
Ms Terrelink.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Yes, that's certainly possible.
Councillor Coetzee.
Thank you. This might be a bit of a weird question, but I understand why we have dogs off leads and on leads in parks where there's more residential areas, houses and so around. But this is in rural areas. How many people do really take their dogs to go walk there? I understand why more people go there with their horses because it's a rural area. But how many people really go there with their dogs? Do we have any stats on that?
Ms Terrelink.
Through you, Mayor, no, we can only go by the community engagement that we've undertaken, and it certainly appears that there are some people who are using the area for dogs, but we don't have the exact figures, no.
Thank you. Any other questions on this item? If there are no other questions on this item, are there any questions on item 410, the proposed heritage management category changes to Sun City Precinct? Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through the Chair, just a question to Deputy Terrelink. A couple of questions. It might be a while, but I'll try and fast-track things. Of course, I note from the report that there are 7 different child places referred to within the Sun City Precinct. And I note, of course, that in short, the recommendation is that they will all be uplifted from Category 2 or 4 up to Category 1 places being of exceptional significance. The plan attached to the report shows the boundaries of the entire Sun City Precinct area, or the curtilage as it's described. But is it possible for the city to produce a map which shows the curtilage of each of the 7 child places referred to in the table at the bottom of page 275? I'd just be curious to look at where those boundaries are, because they could be important in terms of any future DAs being filed in respect of the whole precinct by a developer. So is that possible, please?
Through you, Mayor, yes, we can include that information for the report that comes before Council next week.
Another question, Councillor
Yes, thank
Baker.
you, Madam Mayor. Another question to Ms Terrelink. Once again, the report notes on page 276 under the heading comment, and I quote, changes to the individual management categories of the child places to Category 1 exceptional significance will ensure that any development proposals, I assume meaning DAs, any development proposals received by the city are measured against the local planning policy 4.12 heritage places and assessed with such cultural heritage significance as a priority. It says received by the city. Does it mean DAs received by the city and JDAP, or not? That's the first question, please.
Ms Terrelink.
Through you, Mayor, I might see if my colleague, the
Mr.
Director of Planning and
Dixon.
Sustainability, can address that question.
Thank you. Mr Dixon.
Through you, yes, is the short answer to that. Any development application that is presented to JDAP, there will be a responsible authority report that is prepared by administration. Administration would refer to all relevant policies and strategies in its report and in its recommendation to the JDAP.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. You have another question,
Yes, related to
Councillor
that. Thanks for that, Mr Dixon. A further question to Ms Terrelink. You may wish to send it off to Mark. Sorry, Mr Dixon. Another question too is, and I raise this question because I've had several residents and tourists contact me, that they're concerned that it may take some time, for whatever reason, to formally, how do I put it, formalise, so to speak, under state law, the proposed increase of the status of the maintenance standard for these 7 Category 7 exceptional significant sites. Is there any other approval process that has to be undertaken before this upgrade is finalised and done and dusted and formalised on a final basis, or is there another hurdle to jump before it becomes a consideration which future developers are required to consider?
Ms Terrelink, would you like to respond to that?
Through you, Mayor, my understanding is that the precinct has been listed in the State Heritage Register, and that is now applicable. As a result of that listing, the city is now amending its own local heritage survey to move these child places to management category 1, which is the highest category. And my understanding would be that those arrangements are now in place, and the appropriate responsible authority reports would need to be prepared if there were development applications that impinged or impacted on those heritage listed places.
Final question, Madam Mayor.
Okay,
Final question.
quickly.
Sorry, Ms Terrelink. What is the final date for that approval you just mentioned? What is the date? You said the processes are in place to formally recognise, etc., etc. What is the final formalised date of that?
Ms Terrelink.
Through you, Mayor, in terms of the local heritage survey and the change to management category 1, that would be from next week if Council adopts this recommendation. And my understanding is that the Heritage Council has already indicated that the places are on the State Heritage Register.
Thank you. Excellent.
Thank you, Ms Terrelink. Any other questions on this item? Councillor Mile.
Just a point of clarification, Mayor. With the map in here, the curtilage map of the area, it also encompasses private land, which is, we know there's going to be a Rafa village there and the like. Wouldn't we have just mapped out, like Councillor I forgot his name. Baker. Councillor Baker, wouldn't we just itemise those 7 areas for the mapping purposes? Because obviously, I'm only concerned that we've sort of taken in the external marina walls and everything, and I know they're not part of the actual documentation, but if you looked at the map, I guess the average person would think that those walls possibly are heritage listed as well. Well, they're not.
Ms Terrelink.
Through you, Mayor, so my understanding is that we're only dealing with the child places that will go from whatever management category they currently are in the local heritage survey to management category 1, and as we've indicated, we will include a map where possible of the curtilages for all of those child places. The map that's actually provided in attachment 1 is the curtilage map that applies to the whole precinct that's been developed by the Heritage Council, and they've used that for the purposes of registering the precinct as on the State Heritage Register.
Thank you, Ms Terrelink. Any more questions on this item? There are no more questions on this item. Item 411 is the disbandment of the North Coast Cycling Facility, and I think that's fairly straightforward. I don't think there's any questions on that item.
Sorry,
Councillor Baker.
Just a quick one. Last time I was up at that park, I noticed that the electronic scoreboard or timing sign, etc., had not actually been reattached to the actual metallic frame. Is that all done, dusted, finished?
You would have to ask Mr Singh if that's
I'm sorry,
been done.
can I please direct my question to Mr Hunter Singh?
That's about a operational issue though, not about the committee. Mr Singh?
Thank you, Mayor. I'll have to get some information and provide further response to that one. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we now go to corporate strategy and performance. That's nothing. Ms Jennings, do you have any items on your department that you want to speak to this evening on business, finance, transactional or property services?
Yes, if I could briefly talk about the property services item, please.
Yes.
Oops, sorry. So you may remember in, I think it was the February council meeting, we approved the Wildflower Society lease. And it was subject to actually being able to get a little bit more land from the cadets lease to be able to then build our driveway and car park. So that's what this item is about. What I want to mention is that because there's two options in there pending on a ministerial approval for the option of actually varying the cadets lease, and we've received today the Minister for Land's consent to the variation of the lease. So that means we'll be able to adjust this report in time for council to just have that option ready for you. So we don't have to worry about a whole new lease for the cadets. So happy to take any questions.
Any questions on item 415? Councillor Baker.
Yes, thank you, through the chair to Ms Noeline Jennings. I note that under the proposed new lease, the rent will reduce by approximately $7,000 per annum. Has the city obtained a valuation from a licensed valuer as to whether that rental reduction, as opposed to rental increase, is appropriate in the circumstances, please?
Ms Jennings?
Yes, through the chair, we have assessed that that's appropriate because we are taking that land away from the cadets. So to actually charge them more is not what we really were.
Sorry,
Okay, any other questions? Yes, Councillor Baker.
Very brief. Has the city, in fact, I can understand that the rationale for reducing the rent if the area of the land subject to lease has been substantially reduced, but has the city, in fact, obtained a valuation from a licensed valuer as to the current market rate of the premises minus the excised area of land, please?
Ms Jennings.
Thank you. Through the chair, my understanding is we've used the valuation that we've had in the area when we did the Wildflower Society for the same area.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on item 4.15, the proposed lease to the defence? If there are no more questions to that, I'll start at the top. Do we have any questions to item 4.13, the financial activity statement? There are no questions to that item. Any questions on the warrant of payments, item 4.14? Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, through the chair. I have two, and two only. There are several in writing winging their way to Ms Jennings. I refer to the warrant of payments agenda item for tonight's meeting, in particular page 345. The expense payment I refer to as payment number 15481, dated 13 March 2023. It states that the recipient, or the payee, was Walga. The particulars read training-childcare restraint fitting-one attendee, $788. That just seems a bit expensive to me. I've been fitting these damn things, and removing them for nearly 35 years. All you have to do is read the manufacturer's instructions. It's dead set easy. You just got to focus, rather than what I did initially, do it a couple of times without reading the manual. Then when I stuffed it up, then read the manual, which is unfortunately.
Councillor Baker, what's the question?
That figure seems to be unnecessary. It seems inappropriate that someone would need to do a course with Welga, one attendee, costing $788 to learn how to fit a child restraint seat. And I assume at the same time the course would be extended to explain how to remove a child restraint seat once fitted. Just the cost seems a bit expensive for one person to know how to fit
Okay,
a seat
thank
in
you,
a car.
Councillor Baker. Mr CEO wants to respond to that item.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Baker, for the question. I think that item relates... Sorry. Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Baker, for the question. I think that item relates to two training elements, being one, a training of one person for the child restraint, and one training of an attendee to the introduction to waste management, both adding up to $788.
I didn't see the reference to waste management. I don't think it appears in the box. But thanks for explaining, because it just doesn't stack up. Otherwise, I'm in the wrong business.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Baker. What is your second question on the warrant of payments?
My second question relates to an equally important and compelling payment. I refer to page 379 of the warrant of payments, specifically expense item 30-140. It simply says, in short, Lindown Proprietary Limited, something Hydrolite icy poles, $445.50. Is that figure correct? Because my research conducted by a friend late this afternoon has disclosed that the going rate for an icy pole is 27 cents each, and therefore the city, on that figure, purchased 1,650 icy poles. Why was it necessary for the city to purchase approximately 1,650 icy poles? It may well have been for a summer event, I don't know. Just seeking further information. It seems a lot of money. They're dirt cheap.
Thank you, Councillor Baker. Ms Jennings.
Thank you, Mayor. I think I'll take that one on notice.
Thank you. Any other questions on the warrant of payments? Okay, moving on from the warrant of payments, we have Chief Executive Office, which is item 5, motions on notice. We have none. Late reports, we have none. Item 7, public question time. There's no one in the gallery. Item 8, confidential. We will now go behind closed doors for 2 confidential items, which is 8.1 and the one deferred earlier, 4.9.
because you have such experience in the room.
Item 9, the date of the next meeting is Tuesday the 16th of May at 6 p.m, and I declare the meeting closed at 8:20 p.m.